2061 Odyssey 3 Space Odyssey Series. Chapter 30 Galaxy Down. In the wardroom, the sudden surge of full thrust came like a stay of execution. The horrified officers had seen the collapse of the chosen landing site and knew that there was only one way of escape. Now that Chang had taken it, they once more permitted themselves the luxury of breath. But how long they could continue to enjoy that experience, no one could guess. Only Chang knew whether the ship had enough propellant to reach a stable orbit. And if it did, Captain Laplace thought gloomily, the lunatic with the gun might order him down again. Though he did not for a minute believe that she really was a lunatic. She knew exactly what she was doing. Suddenly, there was a change in thrust. Number 4 motors just cut, said an engineering officer. I'm not surprised. Probably overheated. Not rated for so long at this level. There was, of course, no sense of any directional change. The reduced thrust was still along the ship's axis, but the views of the monitor screens had tilted crazily. Galaxy was still ascending, but no longer vertically. She had become a ballistic missile aimed at some unknown target on Europa. Once more, the thrust dropped abruptly. Across the video monitors, the horizon became level again. He's cut the opposite motor. Only way to stop us cartwheeling. But can he maintain altitude? Good man. The watching scientists could not see what was good about it. The view on the monitors had disappeared completely, obscured by a blinding white fog. He's dumping excess propellant, lightening the ship. The thrust dwindled away to zero. The ship was in free fall. In a few seconds, it had dropped through the cold, vast cloud of ice. Crystals created when it dumped propellant had exploded into space. And there beneath it, approaching at a leisurely 1/8 of a gravity acceleration, was Europa's central sea. At last Chang would not have to select a landing site. From now on, it would be standard operating procedure, familiar as a video game to millions who had never gone into space and never would. All you had to do was to balance the thrust against gravity so that the descending ship reached zero velocity at zero altitude. There was some margin for error, but not much, even for the water landing that the first American astronauts had preferred and that Chang was now reluctantly emulating. If he made a mistake, and after the last few hours, he could scarcely be blamed. No home computer would say to him, sorry, you've crashed. Would you like to try again? Answer, yes, no. Second Officer Yu and his two companions waiting with their improvised weapons outside the locked door of the bridge. had perhaps been given the toughest assignment of all. They had no monitor screens to tell them what was happening and had to rely on messages from the wardroom. Nor had there been anything through the spy mic, which was hardly surprising. Chang and McMahon had very little time or need for conversation. The touchdown was superb, with hardly a jolt. Galaxy sank a few extra meters, then bobbed up again to float vertically, and, thanks to the weight of the engines in the upright position, it was then that the listeners heard the first intelligible sounds through the spy mic. You maniac, Rosie, said Chang's voice, more in resigned exhaustion than anger. I hope you're satisfied. You've killed us all. There was one pistol shot, then a long silence. You and his colleagues waited patiently, knowing that something was bound to happen soon. Then they heard the lock Then they heard the locking levers being unlatched and gripped the spanners and metal bars they were carrying. She might get one of them, but not all. The door swung open very slowly. Sorry, said Second Officer Chang. I must have passed out for a minute. Then, like any reasonable man, he fainted again. Chapter 31, The Sea of Galilee. I can never understand how a man could become a doctor, Captain Laplace told himself, or an undertaker, for that matter. They had some nasty jobs to do. Well, did you find anything? No, skipper. Of course. I don't have the right sort of equipment. There are some implants that you could only locate through a microscope, or so I'm told. They could only be very short range, though. Perhaps to a relay transmitter somewhere on the ship. Floyd suggested we make a search. You took fingerprints and any other idents? Yes. When we contact Ganymede, we'll beam them up with her papers. But I doubt if we'll ever know who Rosie was, or who she was acting for, or why, for God's sake. At least she showed some human instincts, said Laplace thoughtfully. She must have known she'd fail when Chang pulled the abort lever. She could have shot him then instead of letting him land. Much good that will do us, I'm afraid. Let me tell you something that happened when Jenkins and I put the cadaver out through the refuse dump. The doctor pursed his lips in a grimace of distaste. You were right, of course. It was the only thing to do. Well, we didn't bother to attach any weights. It floated for a few minutes. We watched to see if it would clear the ship, and then the doctor seemed to be struggling for words. What, damn it? Something came up out of the water, like a parrot beak, but about 100 times bigger. It took Rosie with one snap and disappeared. We have some impressive company here. Even if we could breathe outside, I certainly wouldn't recommend swimming. Bridge the captain, said the officer on duty. Big disturbance in the water. Camera 3. I'll give you the picture. That's the thing I saw, cried the doctor. He felt a sudden chill at the inevitable, ominous thought. I hope it's not back for more. Suddenly, a vast bulk broke through the surface of the ocean and arched into the sky. For a moment, the whole monstrous shape was suspended between air and water. The familiar can be as shocking as the strange when it is in the wrong place. Both captain and doctor exclaimed simultaneously, "It's a shark!" There was just time to notice a few subtle differences. In addition to the monstrous parrot beak, before the giant crashed back into the water, there was an extra pair of fins, and there appeared to be no gills, nor were there any eyes, but on either side of the beak there were curious protuberances that might be some other sense organs. Convergent evolution, of course, said the doctor. Same problems, same solutions on any planet. Look at Earth. Sharks, dolphins, ichthyosaurs, all oceanic predators must have the same basic design. That beak puzzles me, though. What's it doing now? The creature had surfaced again, but now it was moving very slowly, as if exhausted after that one giant leap. In fact, it seemed to be in trouble, even in agony. It was beating its tail against the sea without attempting to move in any definite direction. Suddenly, it vomited its last meal, turned belly up, and lay wallowing lifelessly in the gentle swell. "Oh, my God," whispered the captain, his voice full of revulsion. "I think I know what happened." "Totally alien biochemistries," said the doctor. Even he seemed shaken by the sight. Rosie's claimed one victim, after all. The Sea of Galilee was, of course, named after the man who had discovered Europa, as he in turn had named after as he in turn had been named after a much smaller sea on another world. It was a very young sea, being less than 50 years old, and like most newborn infants, it could be quite boisterous. Although the European atmosphere was still too thin to generate real hurricanes, a steady wind blew from the surrounding land toward the tropical ocean at the point above which Lucifer was stationary. Here, at the point of perpetual noon, the water was continually boiling, though at a temperature in this thin atmosphere barely hot enough to make a good cup of tea. Luckily, the steamy, turbulent region immediately beneath Lucifer was 1,000 kilometers away. Galaxy had descended in a relatively calm area, less than 100 kilometers from the nearest land. At peak velocity, she would cover that distance in a fraction of a second. But now, as she drifted beneath the low hanging clouds of Europa's permanent overcast, land seemed as far off as the remotest quasar. To make matters worse, if possible, the eternal offshore wind was taking her farther out to sea. And even if she could manage to ground herself on some virgin beach of this new world, she might be no better off than she was now. But she would be more comfortable. Spaceships, though admirably watertight, are seldom seaworthy. Galaxy was floating in a vertical position, bobbing up and down with gentle but disturbing oscillations. Half the crew was already sick. Captain Laplace's first action after he had been through the damage reports was to appeal for anyone with experience in handling boots of any size or shape. Handling boats of any size or shape. It seemed reasonable to suppose that among 30 astronautical engineers and space scientists there should be a considerable amount of seafaring talent, and he immediately located 5 amateur sailors and even one professional. Percy Frank Lee, who had started his career with the Song shipping lines and then switched to space. Although pursers were more accustomed to handling accounting machines, often in Frank Lee's case a 200-year-old ivory abacus, than navigational instruments, they still had to pass exams in basic seamanship. Lee had never had a chance of testing his maritime skills. Now, almost 1 billion kilometers from the South China Sea, his time had come. We should flood the propellant tanks, he told the captain. Then we'll ride lower and won't be bobbing up and down so badly. It seemed foolish to let even more water into the ship, and the captain hesitated. Suppose we run aground? No one made the obvious comment, what difference will it make? Without any serious discussion, it had been assumed that they would be better off on land if they could reach it. We can allow, we can always blow the tank again. We'll have to do that anyway. When we reach shore to get the ship into a horizontal position, thank God we have power. His voice trailed off. Everyone knew what he meant. Without the auxiliary reactor that was running the life support systems, they would all be dead within hours. Now, barring a breakdown, the ship could sustain them indefinitely. Ultimately, of course, they would starve. They had just had dramatic proof that there was no nourishment but only poison in the seas of Europa. At least they had made contact with Ganymede, so that the entire human race now knew their predicament. The best brains in the solar system would now be trying to save them. If they failed, the passengers and crew of Galaxy would have the consolation of dying in the full glare of publicity. End of part 3.